This particular class is focused on retopology using Maya. So this particular class inserts itself within the retopology workflow class. And the goal for this one here, so this particular class, is to really just have an in-depth discussion about the retopology tools that Maya has, so the ones that we call Quadra. You'll also find on the website a retopology class on 3ds Max, and at some point we will also cover the tools for retopology for other software. But for now, these are the two first classes on retopology, or the retopology tools that we are producing. So the goal for this one, as I said, is really just to go through Quadra and to really just dissect it and really learn how to use it properly. And we'll also talk a lot about the mentality behind retopology when it comes to approaching something. So the first part of this particular class will be just to go over all of the basic tools of Quadra, how to import a model within Maya, how to start using Quadra on top of it. And the second part of this particular class will be the part of the class where we will take the creature that Chaos Masons has given us for retopology, and we will start the retopology of that particular creature, and I will explain everything that goes through my mind when it comes to retopology. What is it that I'm looking for? Where do I place my loops? These sorts of things. So let's get started. So I am assuming for this video that you already have basic knowledge of Maya, since we already have quite a lot of content on the website that is really Maya-centric. But if we do need to do so in the future, I can produce an Introduction to Maya class. For the retopology class for 3ds Max, I am assuming that you are starting from scratch because we literally do not have any content related to that. But so for this particular retopology with Maya class, we're just jumping straight into using Quadra here. The first thing, of course, that we need within our scene is an object to retopologize, which is the hypoly that we have created and decimated in the retopology workflow class. So let me go ahead here and import this within our scene. Let's go to File, Import, and this is the OBJ that I had exported. Fortunately, I probably should have taken the time to name it properly, but anyway, that is what we have here to work with. And as you can see, as I'm loading this within the scene, we have the object here that is displayed. Here we can actually rotate around the high poly. It looks like we have some nice performance, so that's great because we really need to have that. If upon import, the scene really slows down to a crawl, then it means that you have decimated your mesh to a result that is a little too dense. And you should probably go back to ZBrush and you should reduce the density of polygons that you have because it won't be workable to do retopology there. But so using this particular model here, the first thing we'll do is really just to go through Quadra as just the tools themselves. Let's really cover in great detail how to use Quadra and the different buttons and subtleties of Quadra. And then after that, we'll really take this particular model and really retopologize it together. Or at least we'll start the retopology of it. We won't complete it here within Maya. We'll also take this model at a certain point and throw it and continue to work on it within 3ds Max. But certainly we will start the retopology of this creature together here and bring it to a certain point together within Maya there. So of course, it would be preferable here to have everything merged. Because this was loaded as an OBJ, Maya has actually split apart the OBJ, even though we had ourselves merged everything into one big subtool together there. So of course, let's just select everything that we have here within the scene, including these sort of sharp, I guess, nails or claws on his fingers. Let's go ahead here. Let's combine all of that here. So mesh, combine. So that all this gets combined to one big mesh. And then let's clear the smoothing. No, actually not. You know what? Let's keep the hard edges that we have here. As you can see, as I'm zooming in, because this mesh was decimated, we're actually winding up having a faceted look to the high poly, the decimated high poly. And I actually kind of want to keep this because you can see here, if I go ahead and I smooth everything, if I do a big smooth, you can see that we've actually lost definition on the details there. That's just the nature of decimating something. And so I'll actually keep all these faceted polygons here. It's just going to make the surface a bit easier to read. But now that we've merged pretty much everything together, we need to go to this here. So let's go to delete by type history, just to get rid of all those extra groups that were still in the scene there. And we had, of course, baked out a curvature map. Let's just apply this as the albedo for this particular model. So let's create here a new material. Here I'm right-clicking upon the character. Let's go to assign new material. And here, it doesn't really matter what we use. In this case, I like to use a Lambert because I don't necessarily want there to be a bit of specularity over the surface, as what would happen if we were using a Blinn or a Phong shader. So a good old Lambert works quite well. Then let's go to our material attributes. Here I'm still right-clicking upon this. And where it says color here, let's make this completely white so that there's no impact of that particular gray color that was there. It doesn't wind up multiplying the texture that we're going to load in here. Let's click on the little checker that's right there, select file, and then in here, let's go ahead and select that albedo that we had baked out, and then afterward converted in Photoshop. Once our texture is loaded, let's simply press 6 on our keyboard to be able to see the albedo within the viewport of Maya. And you can see the result here of using that particular curvature that has been converted to an albedo there. It really helps to read the natural edges of the model, whether this is here, this kind of lasagna border or lasagna noodle that's there. Here's another lasagna noodle that's here. Or this kind of handle here that, yeah, there's kind of a bit of a handle there. This to me still looks to me like caramel popcorn or something. So this is really just a very fun monster that makes me very, very hungry right now. But so yeah, you can see how well we can actually read the surface because of that curvature there. So that's really, really cool. Quad Draw itself is really not all that complicated to use. I actually think that 3ds Max's tools to do retopology are actually a lot more complicated than Quad Draw. But then again, I would say 3ds Max's tools also work a bit better, and they have a few more options that Quad Draw doesn't have. So it's always that trade-off between something is more simple to use, but then it's also a bit less powerful, and so on and so forth there. But regardless, so before we can actually draw any polygons over the surface of this model, the first thing that we need to do, of course, is to convert this object to a live object. And that is within Maya the way that we specify that a particular object is one that we want to use Quad Draw on top of. So all the vertices that will be moving around the scene, they will all automatically snap to this live object. That's actually very simple to do. We just have within our toolbar here to click on this little magnet icon that is right here, which says to make the selected object live. So by clicking on that, after I had selected my decimated high poly, now our object is live and we can use it to Quad Draw on top of. Within our scene, we now need to create our low poly object that we will use afterward, and we will continue to work on the surface. So let's go ahead here and just create a cube within the middle of the scene. We'll just leave the cube there for now. We can't actually delete the cube or the faces of the cube because every object in Maya needs to have at least one polygon. So as long as we haven't created new polygons over the surface of the character, we can't actually get rid of the cube that's there. So let's just leave it there for now. It's not gonna bother us. And to access the Quad Draw tools, we simply need to click on this little modeling toolkit icon that is here to the right of our interface. So this brings out all the modeling tools of Maya. Not all the modeling tools, but some of the modeling tools that are more commonly used. And at the bottom here, where it says tools, you can see that there's a little Quad Draw button. So you just need to click on that to activate Quadra mode. And now you can start to place and move and create polygons that will be snapping over the surface of your object. So this little trick that I have done here was simply by holding down Tab, okay? Once you're within Quadra here, if you hold down Tab, you can see that you see a bit of a cursor that is kind of appearing there over the surface of your model. If you simply do a click and drag, you can see that you are already placing a strip of polygon that will follow the surface of your model there. So we can very easily, like that, start the retopology of our creature together. While my Quadra is activated, if I hold down Tab, as opposed to do a click and drag, if I press the middle mouse button, you can see that I can make the size of this kind of blue polygon there bigger or smaller there. And that will simply change the spacing in between the polygons that we are creating when we are holding down Tab and click and dragging over the surface of a model. So that's pretty cool. And this is a great way to start a retopology because we don't have any polygons right now over the surface of our character, of course. So we just hold down Tab, make the polygons somewhat the size that we kind of expect for these polygons to wind up being. And we just do a click and drag. Just like that, just to start placing the first few polygons over the surface of our model. You can see some of these vertices now have actually kind of bled over to somewhere that we don't really want them to be. So if we want to actually move vertices around and really keep them snapped to the surface of the high poly, don't forget that this particular object right now is a live object, or the high poly is a live object, which means that if we simply click and drag on a vertex, we'll actually be able to move that vertex and keep it snapped to the surface of the high poly. Like so. As you can see, I can just click and drag on this vertex here, and I can move it to a new position over the surface of the high poly. Now, I'm not quite sure why this polygon is kind of looking the way that it is. Looks like the normals are flipped or something. So let's just go ahead and let's just get rid of it, really. To get rid of a particular component that you have created within your low poly here, just hold down Control and Shift, and whatever you're going to click on now, whether it's edge, which as you can see will remove that particular edge. If it's a polygon, you will delete the polygon. When you hold down Control and Shift, whatever you're going to click on will simply be erased from the low res there. But in this particular case, let's just rotate all the way around like that. Let's try to click on that little polygon that's there. Can't quite do it, so I'm really not sure what's going on with that particular polygon right now. So let me just go here, right-click, go to the good old-fashioned face mode right here, and let's just get rid of that. Okay, thank you very much. As you can see, because I had right-clicked and went to face mode, I have actually exited out of Quadra. So if I want to go back in there with my low poly selected, let's just click back on Quadra here. Now for this spacing here between these two polygons, since we have erased the polygon that was in the middle there, we can actually easily recreate the polygon that is missing here and the proper polygon this time by holding down Shift here. So while I'm in Quadra here, if I hold down Shift on my keyboard, you can see that by putting my cursor what is in between 4 different vertices, okay, like in the middle of 4 different open vertices, I can actually create a polygon just by holding down Shift and clicking in the middle in between 4 different vertices. I can create a polygon there that fills in that gap. So that's really, really wonderful. Coming back here to the middle of the chest, if we want to start to extrude some of these edges and some of these vertices to start to fill in this particular area of the pectoralis here, we can hold down Tab. And as I'm holding down Tab, which if you remember is the same shortcut that we have used to create these polygon strips previously, by holding down Tab, and putting my cursor over an edge or over a vertex, I can extrude either that edge or that vertex outward. So holding down Tab, putting my cursor here until this edge turns green, and then I can just click and drag. And as you can see, I can extend and extrude these edges outward. Same thing for vertices. By holding down Tab and putting my cursor over this particular vertex, I can click, shift, and simply click and drag to extend these vertices outward. So as you can see, Quadra is actually very, very easy to use. Pretty much everything that you do is simply by enabling Quadra here and then using different key combinations to create different effects, whether that is to simply erase stuff, whether that is to simply extrude stuff, create strips of polygons, these sorts of things. Quadra is actually very easy to use. And in fact, if you want to see the whole list of different options that you have within Quadra, you can see here once when you have Quadra activated here, there is here a little tab here called Keyboard Mouse Shortcuts. And if you just open that, you'll actually have the full list of shortcuts, pretty much all the functions that you can use while you're in Quadra. I was saying that Quadra was easier to use, but also a bit less powerful than 3ds Max's Polydraw. If you've watched the Retopology of 3ds Max class, you've seen that pretty much like these look like a lot of functions, and they are, but for 3ds Max, you probably have this times like 3 or 4. So there's like even more stuff in there, and there's more modes, and there's more, like there's just so much stuff in there related to Retopology there. So although truth be told, like Quadra's basic functions that are here are for the most part more than enough to retopologize almost anything that you want. There is a few things that do make me want to prefer using other software than Quadra for some really in-depth retopology, and we'll get to that once we get into things like these teeth here. Once we start to retopologize these, we'll start talking about that, because one of the biggest issues of Quadra is that if you have different objects that are very close together, and for this particular high-res, the teeth are actually a separate mesh from the rest of the face, Quadra can have issues where it doesn't quite know on which object to snap once you have different objects like these. Even if they're part of the same object, but they're different elements of the same object, Quadra sometimes has a bit of a hard time to know what to snap to, and it creates these kind of raycasting issues. We'll get to these issues once we get to the teeth themselves, and you'll see that for some of these cases, 3ds Max actually performs a lot better. Okay, so under Quadra options here, if I close and I open this particular menu that is here, so we have a lot of stuff that appears right now. Let me close this keyboard and mouse shortcuts. We'll certainly keep covering some of these functions, but I simply want to start talking about some of these more basic options that are at our disposal here. So the first one here, auto weld, it just makes it so that, let's say that I have here, and I do realize we haven't talked about symmetry yet, but we'll do that in just a minute. Let's say that I extrude vertices here, okay? You'll see that like as I'm moving these, this particular edge towards the center of the character, you can see that the vertices that are right here, they start to snap together at a certain point. And that's simply controlled by that auto weld function that is there. So you can increase that if you want to have that effect be a bit stronger. As you can see, it's not necessarily bad in this particular case. So in terms of symmetry, okay, at the top here, so this isn't an option that is only for Quadra. This symmetry option that is right here is part of the modeling toolkit, and you'll see that whether you're within Quadra or not. So here I've just exited Quadra. And you can see that we can still either select things or manipulate the mesh in a symmetrical fashion. Where it says here symmetry, you can see right now that it's set to world X. meaning that it's using the x-axis of the world to create a symmetry for us. We could turn this off if we don't like it. But in this particular case, I think it works quite well to keep this in world X, which will probably be what you will be using most of the time when doing retopology for characters. So let's keep that on. And this simply allows Quadra and pretty much anything else we could be doing to the mesh to work in a symmetrical fashion. So that's wonderful. So let's cover other important options that we have here for Quadra. First of all, this quad strip width here, that is what happens if you hold down tab and you do the middle mouse button. As you can see, that will change that particular value that is right there. If you go under live constraint options here, so there are a few options here that are very, very interesting. First of all, the mesh color here, you can see it's kind of blue here. It's set with that. It's a pretty good default value, but change that if ever you want to. Same thing with the wireframe color. If you like it, if you prefer it white, you can go ahead and change that to white. But in this case here, let's just keep the default of black. The mesh alpha is the fact that we can kind of see through the mesh here a little bit, of course. And the surface offset, so this one is interesting. I'm not sure what the default value is, whether it's 0.05 or if that's me that set that to that particular value. But it is very good to keep a bit of an offset there. So if your offset is at 0 completely, what's going to happen is that your low res will kind of start to interpenetrate a little bit too closely with the high res. Because the low res is see-through right now, it's kind of hard to really appreciate that. But you can see as I'm rotating around, you can see how the low res here, it's kind of always kind of a little bit inset within the high res. That's actually a problem because it means that our low res globally will actually kind of shrink down by a few millimeters, if you kind of really think about it, all the way around the character. We're actually going to lose just a little bit of volume to the low res around the character. So that's actually not very good, you know? So that's why I really like to keep this particular value here to a certain value, which kind of changes over the model in different places. So there's not really one set value that you can really set that to, but you can start with 0.05. It's a good place to start, and then you can change that as time goes on here. So now that I've set this value here to 0.05, if I click on these vertices, what's going to happen is that they are going to float off the surface just a little bit more than they were before. There's going to be just an ever so slight gap here that you can kind of appreciate there. And in this case, I think that's still too low actually. So let's go to 0.1. And that's just going to give just a slight offset of the low res over the surface. And we're just going to stop, as you can see here, this is really, really nice. We're going to stop that volume loss that we were experiencing before. This value will change as we go over the character, of course. If we're working on, let's say, the teeth here, we probably want to keep this offset value very, very low because the mesh will get very, very fine in that particular spot of the character. And when we're working over a bigger zone of the character, bigger polygons, we want to have a higher value here. So in this case, 0.1 actually works quite well over the chest. But as I said, you know, this will change for you, you know, but just always pay attention to try to like look at your low res from a grazing angle like this and make sure that you're really not losing too much volume and change this value accordingly. And that's mostly it in terms of basic options for Quadra. One thing we haven't talked about is what happens if you simply click on a mesh. As you can see, if I just do a click somewhere over the mesh while I'm in Quadra mode, what I'm actually placing, as you can see, is that I'm actually placing individual vertices, which turns out these vertices are not actually connected to anything yet. So these vertices are just vertices floating in space. If we actually want to connect them and use them to create polygons, remember what I said before. If you hold down Shift while you're in Quadra and you place your cursor, as you can see, in between 4 different vertices, you can actually simply click and fill the space in between those vertices with a polygon. So I can do that here again. Hold down Shift, click here, click there, and now I have created vertices. I have created polygons that have filled the space occupied by those vertices. So it's actually very simple here. I can like create a bunch of these just by clicking on the surface, placing a few vertices, holding down Shift, click, click, click. And now I have filled up the space here between those different vertices with polygons. So really, really cool. As we have said, I can click and drag here to either move vertices or move full edges there. So in this particular case, I actually want to extrude the full edge loop as opposed to just one edge at a time. So by holding down Tab, I can actually use the middle mouse button now. So when my cursor turns green, when it is over a particular edge, let's, with Tab being hold down here, let's do a middle mouse click and drag. And as you can see now, I can actually click and drag and extrude the full edge loop. And now these vertices here, I can move them until they snap together here, move this one until it snaps together there. This particular zone would probably need a bit more work. Let's just move these vertices about here or so. And there you go. So if you want to extrude full edge loops, hold down Tab, middle mouse button, over an edge, click and drag. At some point, we will want to relax the surface. We will want to uniformly kind of push the vertices away from each other until the surface is as uniformly distributed as possible. And to relax the surface, it's very, very simple. Simply have to hold down Shift and then just paint over the surface, as you can see. As I'm painting over the surface, I am actually relaxing the vertices and they're all becoming more equidistant there. So that's really, really cool. If we want to move things around, but not necessarily have to move one vertex at a time, as happens if I simply click somewhere on, let's say, a vertex or click on an edge somewhere, there's a few different ways that we can do it. One of the ways that we can move an actual area of the surface around is by pressing down B, which brings us within soft selection mode. So this isn't something that is only for quad draw. You can actually use soft select within Maya for any other purpose, of course, but it works quite well in this particular case. Once we have pressed B here, you can see the kind of all the vertices that kind of seem to light up around my cursor there. And what's simply going to happen is that as I click and drag, I will simply move a full area of the mesh, the whole area that is highlighted when I click somewhere. I'm going to move that around. So that kind of allows us to move larger areas of the mesh around in any one time. If I hold down B and I do a click and drag, I can change the size of that highlighted zone so that when I do a move afterward, I am moving a bigger or a smaller zone. If you want to get really cute, you can turn on here the little soft selection tab that is right there, go within the menu, and you can actually change a few different things. If you want to change the curve to have a really hard-edged curve, we can actually do that, as you can see. This allows us to have a much harder edged curve. And if we actually want to constrain the soft selection so that it is only operating on, let's say, the surface of the model, which is very useful if we have things like lips, closed lips, and we want to open the lips. This is kind of equivalent to using a move topological brush within ZBrush. This is very, very useful to do that here. So these are where we would change our soft selection options. But let's say that instead what we want to do is to move a full edge loop around. What we can do for that is to hold down Control Shift and then click and drag with the middle mouse button. And by doing that, as you can see, by holding down Control and Shift and click and dragging with the middle mouse button, I can move a full edge loop around at any one time. So all of these different functions, they're all really part of these keyboard mouse shortcuts, or they're all explained here. So I do invite you to really take a look at those and really experiment with those. It's very likely it's going to take you a few days, a few sessions of retopology using Maya to really kind of start to feel a bit of an intuitive sense for the different functionalities that are there and which ones should you use in certain cases, what key combinations should you press to access all these different functions. So this is all just basic learning 101, of course. You simply have to practice it a few times. And after you have done it a few times, and especially after you have slept a few times in between those different practice sessions, it will eventually become more and more second nature there. But so do take a look at these, try them all out, okay? Do carefully read them, try them all out, because it's really key to to learn all of these to really be able to be proficient using Quadra within Maya. Two more tools we haven't talked about that are very, very useful, okay, is that, first of all, if I hold down Control, as you can see, while I'm in Quadra mode, if I hold down simply Control and I click somewhere, I can actually add a full edge loop. So that's really useful when we want to split something. And to be able to do that very, very quickly, just hold on Control, click, and you can add a full edge loop somewhere. So that's really, really cool. And the other thing we haven't talked about is using the multi-cut tool. So sometimes you actually want to start to split, either add a bunch of triangles or split edges in a different way, okay? And when you're in Quadra mode, okay, if you hold down Control-Shift on your keyboard and you do a right-click, you can see here that by doing a right-click here, by holding down Control-Shift and right-click, I have the marking menu that appears. And if I do a movement towards the top, I'm going to get into multi-cut tool mode. And once you're in that mode, you're not technically in Quadra anymore, but the two of those really work very well together. This is a mode now where you can simply click on different places, as you can see, and simply add a bunch of vertices there. So I could add another cut like this if I wanted to. I could add another cut here. I could cut across bigger surfaces, of course, if I kind of wanted to add full edge loop like this that goes from top to the bottom. So multi-cut, very, very useful. The more that you want to simply cut through a mesh, of course. And if you want to go back to Quadra, then you could, of course, just click on Quadra here again, of course, or you could once more hold down Control-Shift, right-click, and go towards the top. So the same movement here. Which means that once you actually become very good with marking menus, okay, you can actually go from Quadra mode like this into multi-cut mode somewhere, and then like this, go back within Quadra mode. So always Control-Shift, right-click, and go towards the top. If you do it into one single stroke, you can swap in between these two modes very, very simply like that. Finally, because we are using Maya's modeling toolkit, we do, of course, have access to the more basic modeling tools that are as part of the modeling toolkit here. So we have our target weld if we want to weld vertices together like that. We have access to the connect if we, let's say, have two vertices selected like here. We click on this and it's going to create an edge in between those. Press enter afterward to convert that with an actual edge. So we have access, of course, to all these basic modeling tools that comes with Maya, and we'll probably use a few of those more basic modeling tools once in a while when we are working on the retopology for this particular creature. But in a nutshell, that's pretty much how you use Maya's Quadra to do retopology, or at least this is really the particular overview of all the important tools when using Quadra to do a retopology. So now let's take all these tools that we have talked about and let's really do the retopology proper for this creature. So let's go ahead here and retopologize this creature together. Just like we have done previously here, we'll start with a cube just so that we can have a basic object to manipulate. And as you can see, once again here, I have erased all the polygons, but this last one polygon here, we really just can't get rid of it. Because every object in Maya has to have at least one polygon, else that object, I suppose, would not exist there. So here we're selecting our high poly and making it live so that now we can use the Quadra functionality of Maya on top of our decimated high poly. Let's set our surface offset here to 0.1. That seemed to work quite well previously. Let's set our symmetry here to be in world X. And let's go ahead here and start placing our first few polygons over the creature here by holding down Tab and doing a click and drag. Same problem as before, this polygon seems to be completely inside out just because of where the vertices have snapped over the model there. So let's go ahead here and erase this polygon here once again. And then let's use our quad draw, hold down Shift, and click in between those four vertices to create a polygon to fill that gap there. You can see with the default well distance of 10 here that it can be quite hard sometimes to get those vertices near the center line of the character to kind of weld together properly there. So we could always adjust the auto weld distance too, of course, if these are a bit too hard to snap together, but there you go, we've managed to do it. So now what we want to start to do is really just to start to extrude a bunch of these different edges there to really fill in the whole area of the pectoralis with different edge loops, different quads here. So there's really, we can start from anywhere that we want here, starting from the center line kind of made a bit of sense to me. And here I'm pulling down these vertices. I'm extruding these vertices down here. Once again, by holding down Tab and then simply clicking on those vertices. I can do a click and drag and I can pull these down. And I'm pulling them down until I reach the bottom border of the pectoralis, so that afterward what we can do is to hold Control and start to simply add a few extra edge loops like these and really fill in the whole area of the pectoralis with all these beautiful quads in a way that is very, very quick, as you can see. Let's get rid of this one polygon there. In fact, let's get rid of all of these. We will recreate them with the new edge loops that we have added. And of course, the goal at this point really is just to extrude edges and to really try to create edge loops that kind of nicely follow the organic shape that the creature has. This is a very complicated creature to retopologize just because there are so many different anatomical structures, both real and imagined ones, that really seem to flow in a lot of very different directions there. So this is a very dynamic surface that we have to deal with. Most retopology projects probably don't involve working on creatures that are this complex, but this is just what happens when you work with Chaos Mason's data, I suppose. But so here, my goal really is to create edge loops and polygon strips that really follow these kind of like either muscles or almost tendons. And I want to try to simply continue to extrude edges everywhere to really simply follow the natural, just the natural flow, as I said, of the structure of the creature there. So this is kind of the equivalent of the thoracic cage. So it's a good idea here to simply encircle that particular anatomical structure with a poly loop or a polygon loop, if you will. And then what we can do is to simply fill in the inside of that polygon loop with a bunch of quads. So there really isn't necessarily one strategy to rule them all as to how to approach creating a retopology or how to go about creating a retopology for a very organic creature like this. But I do find that simply going around a particular structure of some kind and then afterward filling in the hole, if you will, that is left over is a pretty good strategy usually to have a pretty good edge flow. But as you can see, just like when I'm working on high reses, I tend to kind of jump a bit all over the place. And I'm kind of certainly doing the same with retopology. I don't know how good that necessarily is as a habit there, but I just found that that's kind of how I like to work there. So yeah, here I am continuing those edge loops over those kind of tendons of the pectoralis. And here trying to see if I can kind of start to create that little hole there and start to create the geometry that is around that little hole that is there. Still with the mentality that I kind of want to go around a particular anatomical structure with these polygons here. Which in this case means going around this particular hole and then connecting the border of that hole with pretty much everything else that we have done so far. You can see this is already starting to be a bit of a puzzle. How are we going to exactly resolve this particular zone here? I do find that trying to work and trying to stay with quads as much as possible is a good habit. But truth be told, you know where I stand as far as quads and triangles are concerned. This is a low res for video games. I think it's perfectly acceptable to have a bunch of triangles, and we will certainly have to add a bunch of triangles. And so if you really cannot resolve a particular zone using a bunch of quads and have it still look pretty clean, it's totally fine to simply add a cut there, because sometimes the cleanest mesh is a mesh that has a triangle or two in there. And certainly in this case here, splitting here a particular edge as a triangle here, it just gives a surface that winds up looking a lot cleaner for me, you know, as we're pulling some of these edges down that particular triangle there. I actually think makes the surface looks a lot cleaner than what I was trying to do before with those quads. You can see as I'm extruding these edges down that I'm trying to align the vertical loops so that they are pretty much at the same position between the ones that were on that higher tendon and the ones that are on that bottom tendon there. I'm trying to really align them so that we wind up having the same kind of resolution. And it's just going to make deformation a lot cleaner by doing that. Once again here, the best way to resolve this really is simply to add a triangle there, and so that we can have a similar structure or similar configuration of polygons on that bottom tendon as what we had been constructing on the top tendon. Of course, I'm always trying to keep polygons that are relatively square in terms of shape. For these particular tendons, it's kind of hard to do so. But as much as possible, I'm trying to keep a relatively square-ish shape to most polygons that I'm putting down when doing retopology, and also trying to make the distance between the different edge loops to be as consistent as possible. So you can see this is, again, one of those kind of little puzzles that we have to solve there. I don't want to just necessarily add a bunch of triangles necessarily. So I think we can probably resolve this using quads and still have a surface that's going to look pretty clean. So this is starting to look pretty good to me. And you can see how I'm trying to sort of encircle that hole that he has there, right? So here we go. We've just closed off that particular hole. Um, I'm trying to really encircle a particular structure because then it just makes it easier to connect. Well, first, it makes the edge flow kind of follow the particular anatomy of the creature. So that's really good. It makes it easier to add loop and subtract loops. But then it also kind of, for me, makes it easier afterward to connect the border of whatever it is that I have just encircled with whatever else we are working on. over the creature. Just trying out different configurations here to see what is the best kind of edge flow that I can get out of this. I kind of like this because it kind of looks somewhat symmetrical in a way between the top and the bottom, although there is here probably a loop that is missing. So that we have more or less the same edge loops that are vertically aligned between the top and the bottom there. So this is getting closer to me to something that I feel is acceptable as geometry for this particular zone. So same thing here. There's all these kind of holes at the bottom of the thoracic cage that you can see. There's like 3 major holes there. So same kind of idea as with the top. It's a good idea to try to kind of encircle those holes, and then we can connect that with pretty much the rest of the thoracic cage. It's going to give us a few, well, holes in the mesh that we can afterward fill using polygons. Not these holes per se, but more the places where the geometry is not filled, places where we can go ahead and just add a bunch of geometry to close off the surface. So now I want to take this, I want to connect it to the top so that we can finish encircling this particular kind of hole that the creature has on his chest. If I'm not quite able to resolve the top connection at the top right now, or the place that I've kind of haven't completely closed it off there, we can always come back to that after we have done a bit more work on these other 2 holes near the bottom. So I'm really trying to figure out where do I have polygons on the surface that are really becoming quite elongated and really not square-ish in nature. And those are usually a pretty good place to fill in a extra edge loop just to make the polygons that are there a lot more square-ish in nature. This isn't a bad moment to start to just relax the surface a little bit um, and try to just uniformly spread those vertices that we have added so far. And let's continue working on those holes. So I'm definitely going to need an extra edge loop that kind of goes on these, could call them like polygonal columns, I guess. We'll definitely need to have an extra edge loop in there to be able to completely close off the border of these holes. Oh, see, so now I'm getting a pretty nice kind of poly loop that is going around the first of these 3 holes that the creature has on his thoracic cage. You can see how the poly loop kind of more or less goes around the hole. It's not perfect right now, but it's good enough that the polygon flow that is the result of that is, I think that's good enough. See, so there's a natural edge there that is looking kind of white over the model, and that's very easy to spot because of the curvature. So I just want to place an actual edge loop to make sure that it's following exactly over that particular natural edge on the tendon of the creature connecting the pectoralis to the shoulder. Yeah, so adding an extra edge loop here on that kind of polygonal column, if you will, that kind of goes in between those two holes there, really helps to allow me to redirect these poly loops around both of those two holes that we have there. Um, and so that helps quite a lot. We'll definitely have to do the same thing between the two top holes at the same time. Because I really like the resulting polygonal flow that we're getting out of this. So let's erase these polygons. Let's add that extra edge loop here so that we can redirect here those polygons around those holes and have a pretty nice poly flow in the process. Now there's a pole there. I'm not a big fan of it. You can see the multi-cut here becomes very useful. Once again, hold down Shift, right click, and do a movement towards the top to go in between the multi-cut tool and the quad draw tool. It takes a few times to get the hang of it, but after you've done it a few times, you'll see that it gets nice and very intuitive to switch in between those two tools there. It's very tempting to continue this particular edge towards the top there. It kind of allows us at the bottom to be able to quadrify the whole mesh. Let's do a bit of a relax here to uniformly spread those vertices, and then we can get rid of this particular edge here afterward. And here we have a bunch of nicely square quads. So it's very, very nice as a way to resolve that. I'm always hunting for places where I can really just either add a particular edge loop or get rid of one or just relax the surface to really try to always keep my vertex grid to be as uniformly spread as possible and keep my polygons to always be as square-ish in nature as possible there. Also try to like really avoid to have a bunch of zigzags, okay? Like you always want your edge loops to flow in a very nice and controlled way over the surface. You don't want edge loops to just start to flow as a bunch of different zigzags. Now, we don't have a particular example of this at this stage, but if you start to see your particular edge loops start to create a bunch of zigzags over your surface, think of the letter Z when I say zigzag. If your edge loops start to kind of look like they're sort of going up and down and then up and down, or left, right, left, right, left, right, there's definitely a case there of a surface that needs to be relaxed. Yeah, see, so for this particular zone, I'm not a big fan of having that particular pole that was there. So I'm trying to see if there's a way for me to resolve this particular zone without having a bunch of poles. So if I do this and then I add a polygon there, no more poles over the circumference of that hole. So that makes me very happy. There's actually still a few poles near the bottom, but at least we've gotten rid of some of those poles, so it makes me that makes me happy. Let's move on from the chest and let's start working on those clavicles a little bit, or what kind of looks like clavicles. There too, I'm always kind of looking to extend a bunch of edges and really to reach a natural edge of the model. And those are very easy to see once again because we have that curvature map that really helps us to see the natural edges of the model. And so even if we want to introduce a few different extra edge loops in there, I just find it very useful to just always kind of extrude vertices until I kind of reach what seems to me to be a natural edge on the model. Because that gives us a very nice polygon flow like this that kind of captures both the part of the clavicle that is kind of facing forward and the part of the clavicle that is kind of facing towards the top there. We have a bit of a 90-degree angle there. And we can always add extra edge loops on top of that afterward if the surface winds up being a little too low res. But we have the polygon flow, and that's what matters the most for me right now. This zone is definitely tricky because you kind of want to keep quads, but then here it would be a lot easier just to have a bunch of triangles. Although we can kind of resolve it like this, I think, and that actually kind of works. And here we have only quads, so I think this is actually a pretty good way to resolve this. I really am making. I always trying to make an effort to keep quads as much as possible. It's just that there are moments where you just need to have triangles in there, you know. But for this particular case, I think we have avoided that. I have to point out again how complicated retopology this particular creature is. Okay, this is definitely one of the most challenging models I pretty much have ever retopoed because most high reses they don't have that many very tiny little structures that all kind of flow in different directions over the surface. Most things that we retopo are actually a bit simpler than this, and it just makes controlling the particular edge flow a little bit simpler. But I am certainly up for the challenge. And here, there too, we can see that there's actually a small little hole there behind that kind of tendon of the sternocleidomastoid. You can see there's a little hole there. I'm kind of struggling right now to kind of figure out if it's worth to spend polygons there to really capture that hole, or if I should just accept that the low res goes all the way over that and just ignores the hole. Because like this is a low res, right? So there is um, there's certainly a set kind of size to these polygons that we're more or less trying to hit, mentally speaking. Um, And so at some point, like tiny, tiny little holes like that over the creature, at some point you're just really thinking like, well, is this really worth to try to really capture this? I would wager that it probably is because this is close to the head of the character. So, this is starting to get it within the zone where we want our polygons to start to look smaller and smaller there. But let's just continue here with the creature, with the neck of the creature, and we may come back on that later. So yeah, there's this kind of tube here, this kind of esophagus on the front here of the creature. Or I suppose that would be the trachea. The esophagus is actually behind the trachea uh, from an anatomical standpoint there. So since this is a nice kind of cylindrical kind of shape, it makes it easy just to follow the circumference of that kind of cylinder or cylindrical shape or tube-like shape with a bunch of different edge loops. So this part is actually quite simple to resolve. This is kind of to look a little bit low res though. Let's add an extra edge loop here. And then let's try to relax the surface to push away the different vertices until are all uniformly spread as much as possible. Once again, if you want to add an extra edge loop on a poly loop that already exists, hold Control and then just press. It's very tempting here to try to move or try to cut through the geometry to really kind of follow the natural kind of valley that there is there that kind of separates that trachea from the bottom of the neck there. So that's why I've used here the multi-cut tool just to go in here and start to add an actual edge loop that kind of goes diagonally across. And I'm trying to see if there's an elegant way to resolve the surface afterward to capture that particular valley there at the bottom of the trachea. You can see here my surface offset is a little high, so this particular vertex really isn't getting pushed within that little crevice there because the surface offset just makes the low res float a little too far off the surface. So I just had to manually take that vertex and just move it. Yeah, so this is getting pretty nice. Starting to be happy with the way that we have that kind of diagonal sort of edge there. As you can see for me, key to really capturing a really great retopology is to really look at the silhouette. So here you can see like from front view, this kind of looks fine, right? But the moment that we rotate the model around and we look at the silhouette here, you can see that my silhouette of the low res really wasn't matching the high res, and it was this big chunk of the high res that was kind of sticking out there. And so the key really is just to add as much geometry as you need until you have captured a really nice silhouette that looks very much the same between the low res and the high res. continuous clavicles here. Let's add an extra edge loop to keep those polygons nice and square. And I'm also trying to kind of align those vertical edge loops with what is happening at the bottom of the clavicle. We have that really beautiful white line that we can see because of the curvature, so it makes it very easy to know where to place those vertices exactly. Still fighting with that hole and wondering whether I want to actually capture it or not, but I think it's too fine of a structure to really be worth to spend the polygons now. You kind of have to make a choice, you know, like sometimes you're like, yeah, this is just too small for me to really bother. Because if you try to always capture exactly like every tiny, absolutely every tiny little detail from a high poly within your low poly, then first your retopology, it's just going to take you forever, but also you're probably going to wind up having a mesh that will look just too high res, you know. It's always a good idea just to always kind of zoom out, you know, just like when we're working on high poly or working on like pretty much anything else really, like you want to have that big picture view of what it is that you're working on, right? You want to zoom out from your model and you want to be able to look at it from a distance and kind of be able to judge, okay, from this distance from which I expect the player to see, are my polygons the size that they need to be to both capture all the details that we'll see, but also am I, you know, making sure that I'm not starting to be overly focused on a small zone somewhere and starting to add way too many little polygons that really don't contribute enough or won't contribute at all to how the creature or how the character will look like from the player's point of view. Let's move on to those kind of gills that are there because they're very interesting, right? Because they kind of almost look like a sort of accordion, and we definitely want to capture their flow with a few edge loops here. So you can see I'm starting by adding one edge loop every two gills, if that makes sense. I'm kind of jumping over one gill and really placing a particular edge loop that really follows one of the gills. So every other gill there. So jumping over one kind of seems to make sense to me. It's just based upon the fineness of the details in that particular zone and the fact that I kind of want to keep polygon size of a relative similar density to what I have elsewhere there. But you know, if we kind of imagine the way that the creature would be moving, the way that the creature would be bending her neck there, we definitely would imagine that these gills would have to move very nicely as the creature kind of moves her neck around there. So we definitely want to make sure that we're capturing the beautiful flow of those gills using an actual edge loop. And the best way then again to do that is to simply place our vertices exactly on those white lines that the curvature map sort of points out to us. You can see here I'm always hunting for places where the silhouette of the model isn't quite captured exactly by the low res. The silhouette of the high poly isn't quite captured exactly by the low res, so you kind of always want to go in there and just very finely tweak the position of your vertices until they're always resting on those natural edges. This is definitely a caramel popcorn creature right now. Looking at this creature just makes me very hungry. Maybe I should have chosen a different color to put within the albedo of the creature. Let's continue those edges going around the neck, and let's really close off the circumference of the neck so that then we can start to really fill in the geometry around and over the head. Always trying to keep these polygons square and as uniformly spread as I can. And you can see here how that particular edge loop I just added around the neck, it kind of naturally follows the sort of the lines of the model underneath. So that's really, really cool. You always kind of want to do that as much as possible. I like to do this here, just extrude these very, very long polygons, and then afterward, hold control, go back in here and just click to add a bunch of edge loops until I get polygons that'll have more or less a square shape. So here I'm starting to go around those kind of, I like to call them the love handles because I don't know what else to call them. I know love handles are technically supposed to be somewhere else over someone, but it's just what always goes through my mind in this particular case, right? So I'm starting to go over those kind of love handles that he has, or that she has over her shoulders there. And the kind of frills that are at the extremities on the top of those kind of love handles, they're going to be very interesting because we're really going to have to start to cut in a bunch of extra geometry and add a bunch of triangles for sure if we really want to capture the nice kind of zigzaggy effect that we have to the border of those frills there. So that's going to be a major challenge for us from a retopology standpoint. But the first thing, of course, is just to figure out a proper edge flow to go all the way around those particular love handles. And then afterward, we can worry about having to cut in there a bunch of extra geometry to really start to capture the very kind of zigzaggy, almost lasagna pasta-y border of those frills. Always trying to keep square polygons as much as possible. Always trying to distribute my vertices so that they are as uniformly spread as possible. So here, once again, my goal is to always go around a structure, kind of enclose part of the mesh, following the natural structures, these sort of natural organic structures that we have over the character. Really enclose something, and then afterward fill in that enclosed space with polygons. But in this case, there's so many different subtleties left and right that it actually is a big challenge just to enclose a particular structure to begin with. But you can see how I have those loops that are going all the way around that particular love handle that's there. And then what I want to do is in the front of the character to really connect what I have done there with the front of the clavicle, the part of the clavicle, uh, so that we can really just enclose the whole zone of the shoulder. And then we can start to fill in all of that enclosed space. By the way, if Maya starts to really slow down like this, and you feel as if when you're pulling on these vertices, when you're extruding these kind of vertices out, there starts to be a bit of a delay every time that you do that. That's because you've essentially done so many different operations that Maya is starting to be really weighted down by the weight of the history of all those different modifications you have done there. So once in a while, okay, go to Maya's edit menu and then go to history and just do a delete history over the mesh that you have. And that's going to recover all of that performance that you have lost. So here we're enclosing the head. Since we had a very nice clean border at the neck to work from, we can start to really extrude all of this geometry towards the front of the head very gradually. Always, of course, doing that while trying to follow a natural flow of edge loops and trying to more or less kind of understand the natural flow of the anatomical strictures of the creature and trying to really kind of respect that as much as possible with those edge loops that we're trying to place down. You can see here towards the back where the kind of like the skull of the creature right now, the bottom of that, where the skull of the creature towards the back kind of inserts within the neck there. I probably should go in there and add an extra edge loop to really follow that natural kind of separation between the skull and the neck there. And I don't quite have that right now, so that's a bit of a problem. So this geometry actually towards the back really isn't all that great. So I think we need to go in here and we need to simply start to just erase all of what I have done here. We hold down Control Shift and we do a click and drag like this, we can erase a bunch of different polygons at one time. So that's really wonderful. And what I want to do instead here is actually just to hold tab and click and drag and really try to follow what I said here. So the back of the skull there, how the skull of the creature kind of more or less inserts within the neck. I want to make sure that I'm placing a particular uh, edge loop that really follows that particular separation. Because it feels to me as if that separation would become important when the creature moves her head around, and that we really capture that very nicely. So this definitely feels to me like a better polygon flow. And now let's connect the back of the skull here to the neck. Of course, this is a bit tricky because the edge loops really don't flow in the same direction right now. So we have to probably add a few poles like these just to try to redirect some of these edge loops. But I think this is getting resolved in a pretty nice way. So I'm pretty happy with this. Moving on to the jaw here a little bit. Once again, I'm trying to really follow the natural shape of the jaw using the edge loops as much as possible. And certainly for the mouth, we definitely can afford to go a lot more high res than pretty much elsewhere over the creature because it is the mouth. And so pretty much anything that is on the head of a creature can definitely benefit from being a bit more high res than anywhere else. That's true for creatures, that's true for characters. Definitely, like you always want to treat the head as a zone of the character that is of a higher importance than pretty much anywhere else over a character, which means you can afford to have smaller polygons in that zone, which is really good because we'll definitely need to have smaller polygons to be able to really capture nicely the high density of the teeth there. The chin here you can see is definitely too low res right now. So we definitely need to add a few extra edge loops to the front of the chin there to make this just look nice, just nicely high res. Let's go ahead here with the multi-cut tool and let's add a few cuts to this. Let's create a corner point here. It goes from here to there. Press enter, which allows us to add a little bit of that extra geometry towards the front, but keep everything plotted. This is still definitely too low res, because you can kind of see as we're looking at the creature from the bottom there, how the front of the chin is just this kind of point there. It's this kind of very sharp angular point. So that's definitely still too low res. Always trying to relax the surface as I go, try to make sure that I am keeping the distance between the vertices to always be as uniform as possible. So do make generous use of the relax feature, which once again, you just have to hold down Shift and then click on your mesh to relax it. So these kind of corner points like these, they're a great way to redirect a bunch of edge loops that you are adding. If you really want to keep everything as quads there, adding these kind of corner points like these, um, these really allow you, as you can see, to really redirect loops that are coming over the head of the creature there, around the head of the creature. And it sort of allows us to have a bit more geometry towards the front of the creature and sort of get rid of that geometry towards the back in a very elegant way without having to resort to triangles. Right now, I have a hole. I have two loops coming in from the front, but I have one loop in the back. So we either add a triangle there, or we add a corner point once again. Now, this is a zone of the creature that I really hate because the teeth there, they're kind of there's a lot of very fine structures, and there's the interior of the mouth, which really just makes retopologizing this particular zone a really big pain. You'll see we're actually winding up having a lot of those. Something that I have alluded to at the beginning of this particular class, which was that we're starting to get ray casting issues. And what I mean by that, okay, is that sometimes we'll see that when I try to move some of these vertices over the teeth there, you start to see the vertices kind of, they're not quite sure whether they want to snap to either the structure of the teeth itself or the structure of the gums. And it just makes moving these vertices around a really, really big pain. So these raycasting issues are one of the biggest reasons why I don't necessarily want to continue much further working on this creature within Maya. And this really just happens when you have structures like these, when you have shells or objects over the model that are sort of interpenetrating through other objects. When polydraw is kind of, when quadraw is kind of moving vertices to snap them to the surface, it doesn't always quite know which object to snap to. And it just makes working on this particular zone a really, really big, painful process there. So we can kind of make our life here a bit easier somewhat just by hiding the teeth or separating them as a separate geometry so that we can continue to work on the gums of the creature independently of the teeth. But sooner or later, we obviously have to deal with the teeth, right? Um, and I just find that those raycasting issues they may be kind of subtle to communicate through video, but you'll definitely see that if you get within a similar situation at some point, you'll start to feel it too. They're just sometimes you move vertices around, and they're just not quite snapping where they need to over the surface of a model, and it just makes your life kind of miserable there. So this is one of the bigger zones why one of the bigger reasons why I rather sometimes work with 3ds Max to do retopology and not with Maya there. Sometimes it's good to duplicate the high res and simply erase a big chunk of the high res that you know that you're not working on right now, and just keep a smaller part of the high res that you're really focused on. Because sometimes as you rotate around, okay, as you rotate the camera around, and you are using quad draw, you can see here I'm even just getting rid of the lower part of the face completely there. I'm just going to erase all of that. And that is just to make my life easier as I'm working on the top gums of the character there, because it makes it so that as we're rotating the camera around and we're moving those vertices around using quad draw, and because those vertices, they essentially snap to the surface based in on screen space, based on what the screen is actually pointing to or has within the screen. Just here in this particular case, just completely getting rid of the bottom of the jaw here of the creature. Just makes it a bit easier to work on the top of the jaw of the creature. So don't be afraid to do something like this, just to kind of duplicate your high res, and really just keep a small part of it that you're really just highly focused at that particular moment to do your retopology of. It's just going to help to address some of those kind of issues where sometimes you're just moving a vertex using Quadra and it just seems to snap to something that's not even within view right now, or that it just shouldn't snap to. Just erasing part of the high res like that, but do make sure to duplicate it first, will kind of help you in certain cases, just to make your life a bit easier there. So you can see it just makes it easier here for me to work on the inside of the mouth there, on the roof of the mouth. It just makes my life easier here, and I can work on the zone a lot easier there. If the bottom of the mouth was still in there, if the whole jaw of the creature was still in there, and God forbid the whole creature itself within this particular high poly model, I wouldn't be able to work on this particular zone right now. So going around those teeth is obviously very complex. This is a lot of very subtle work. We want to make sure to really kind of capture the nice border going around those teeth. And as you can see, I am experiencing all those little ray casting issues there, where the surface won't really quite snap sometimes. 3ds Max just deals a bit better with those ray casting issues that we have talked about. And I know from personal experience that working on these teeth within 3ds Max will just make my life a lot easier there. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to continue working on this particular retopology for the creature within 3ds Max. Even if you're just interested to use, let's say, Maya to do your retopology, but you want to see what is the continuation of the retopology of this particular creature, I do invite you to check out the Retopology with 3ds Max class that is immediately following this one to see how we continue the retopology of this creature from now on. So that's it for this particular class. I will see you there for the continuation of this retopology. See you there.